All right. Well, we'll
I
go on.
turned it on.
Okay. Look at that. See, I'm helping you out. Perfect. All right. So as we take a look here, we're going to talk through some of the licensing components as well as some of the different tips and items to help engage your users. So here's our agenda or topics. I'll just kind of go through that. So myself, who am I? I'm a senior consultant here at RSM, focused in on modern work. And so when we think about what that means, I work with Microsoft. I work specifically on moving clients over from Google, or I have a Lotus Notes migration coming up, as well as really the adoption of the technology for us. I'm a huge fan of out-of-the-box functionality in terms of if we can do it using the tools that are in place today, it's going to allow us to be more successful. And then I also own and drive a 75 AMC Pacer. So if you see a tan Pacer in the South Metro this summer, 100% chance it's me. There's one other Pacer here in Lakeville, and it's bright yellow for it. So who do I work for? Here's my one slide here. Obviously, they pay me, so I like to talk a little bit about it. I work for RSM. RSM is a consulting, tax, and audit organization focused in terms of the middle market. So we focus in organizations that roughly have as few as 25 users all the way up to the enterprise, but specifically, that middle market area. All right. So when we take a look at it, there's 3 questions I want you to think about. So with that, if you relate it to your personal life, what if you didn't use everything that Netflix had to offer? So take that Netflix subscription that you have, or Amazon, or Hulu, or Jim, or Spotify. Take any of those subscriptions, and let's say that all you're using with it is you're streaming the one show that you want to watch. And you're not downloading anything. You're not sharing your subscription with anyone. So when we think about it, we're just using one little piece of it. Then the other piece of it is, what if we use them all personally, but our family did not? This is one that should resonate heavily for you on the Microsoft side. Maybe you're using all of the tools itself, or your IT department is using all of the tools itself, but you're having hard adoption of other technologies and other tools. And then the other piece is, what if your family made the decision on what to pay for? Microsoft licensing is expensive. It just went up in price, right? And so when you think about that, there's always a constant battle of, do we need it? And if so, what are we getting out of it? And so those are some of the questions here that, if you're thinking, well, we just need it to do business. The accounting department isn't saying they need it to do business, right? They're not seeing all of the features there. So the more you use it, the more likely it's going to be the less likely rather, it's going to be a battle for future kind of adoption and payment there. So when we think about it, this is why I want to kind of bring this out here for you. We have different generations in the market, right? So my mom fits into the baby boomer area. My older brother fits into the generation. I am a cusper, technically a millennial for it. I hate that term. And then we have Generation Z as well entering the workplace. When we think about all these tools that are out there, of course, Microsoft Teams fits most of it. But when we look at these tools themselves out there, it becomes really, really important to highlight how we're using them, provide value, or provide feedback, and talk about how great the tools are out there. The other main theme here is we always have we're modern workers, right? So when we think about what it means to be a modern worker, it's the idea of, I can use my cell phone today to do all of my work. Or maybe I can, work in that social network. And I think that social network piece is blurring a little bit as you look at Teams and Yammer and the Communities app that can get brought in. The works on multiple devices. I was reminded of this a week ago. Take a step back in time. For those of you that are using OneDrive and SharePoint and using the OneDrive Sync application today, or maybe the browser, you'll have to go way back in time to think about this. So I'm going to take you back to early 2000s, and I was a college student. And just at the beginning of the turn of the century, I was a college student, and I obviously had my computer in my dorm room, and I had the library had computers as well, right? You had the computer labs available to you. And when I needed to bring files back and forth, I had a few options, right? I could put them on a USB drive. I could put them on a zip disk. Those were a thing, right? Floppy disk was still around. I had the USB drive as well. Or the other way of working was I emailed files back and forth. Without raising your hand, think about the times that you used to email things back and forth. I just encountered a VP of a large manufacturer that does that today because she has a laptop and she has a desktop and she emails files back and forth. And so with that, you kind of said, well, what in the world are you doing? There's a better way out there, right? So those are some of the things to take a look at and think about. And it was because she had no idea it was possible, right? No one had ever taken the time to show her what was possible. The other aspect of it is we work with outside and external parties. So that's really a key component here as you're starting to think about, some of the decisions that you have out there. So this is a slide that's borrowed from the Microsoft more or less deployment methodology and those types of pieces. You have the front end and you have the back end. What I like about this slide is it spells out kind of all the different features. And if you had specific Microsoft licensing, you could check all of these boxes along the way. What I don't like about this slide is it makes it seem like you never have to go back to the one before. Your roadmap of technology should be like chutes and ladders. You should be able to move forward, and then sometimes you might have to go back and look back again at what was already deployed out there. How many of you have started to deploy Microsoft Teams phones? If you haven't deployed a Microsoft Teams physical phone, you'll have to review your conditional access policies if you have those in place today, especially if you have people working remote. So think about those types of pieces as that it's not just a one line, it's really a circle aspect of it. Again, with that, we'll kind of cover some of these topics for us, but I like to include this in there. So if you go and grab the deck afterwards, it allows you to use it and say, all right, here's where we're at on our journey, or here's the boxes we've checked, and feel free to color in the messages there. So what is the modern workplace? So this is one where when we think about what a modern workplace aspect is, some of our stakeholders within inside of our organization may not know what it is. So how I summarize it is it's, the securing our work environment. It's the ability to work anywhere, anytime, and it's the ability to give users everything they need to enhance and capture productivity. 2 years ago, or 2 and 2 months ago, this wasn't real. This was talked about, and some of you were doing this, but now it's like what everyone is doing, right? It's the idea of saying our employees need to be able to work here, here, here. They need to be able to move from office to office. They need to be able to work from home one day, be in the office the next day, and have that seamless, productive experience. So when we think about the idea here, there's a couple trends that are showing up. The first one is, more or less the digital and demand for remote and hybrid working, blurring the boundaries between time and place. This is one that I live and breathe a lot. And for those of you that work from home for it, it's a tough thing. Demand for lifelong learnings, the shelf life of information becomes shorter, and then of course AI and automation. So when we think about remote and hybrid working, right, that was the topic, and some of you might have practiced that before in the past. Some of you might have said, you know what, I can't work from home. I don't have the space, or I don't have the focus on my end. Well, guess what? COVID forced everyone to somehow facilitate remote working. And so with that, now you have this other trend, right, where you have this hybrid approach where it's like, all right, on Monday, you have to be in the office. On Tuesday, you can work remote. On Wednesday, you need to be in the office. This is not a hybrid work presentation. In fact, there's conferences on what hybrid work really is. My one rule of caution is if you're going to do that, don't just set it up with a bunch of meetings, during that time frame that are remote, right? Make sure that you're capturing being in person and the value behind it. The boundaries between time and place. There's no, if you work in different time zones, if you're someone that works from home, maybe you start your day earlier when you would have commuted before, and now you're working a little bit longer. You're missing that disconnect time as well. We'll talk about one of the ways and one of the announcements that you can post to your organization to help with that. Lifelong learners. This is one piece, that I think goes to really the idea of saying, what do we want our employees to know? Where are we looking to have them grow as an employee? And then ultimately, how do we retain them? Learning is a huge part of it right now. Obviously, the retention of employees is very, very important. But developing lifelong learners in terms of giving them a path on where to go, not sticking them into a specific area. Information, there's a lot coming out to us as well. So keep in mind that there's large amounts of information that are coming our ways for it. So again, how do we consume that, right? Bite-sized tweets and posts. And that's how I consume a lot of my content, right? So you guys all come to these sessions, you learn from the MVPs on how they work. Guess what? Here's a secret. If you have Twitter, I'm not sure how it's going to change with the news this week, but if you have Twitter, go and follow them, because guess what they're doing? They're posting those announcements on what's changing and what's coming in the near future. And so those bite size, you can be like, yep, that's important. Nope, that's not important. If you follow the Microsoft announcements, you know that there's a lot of data coming at you, but that doesn't necessarily, not all of it matters, right? So how do we consume and how do we make sure that it's appropriate? The other item is artificial intelligence and automation. This is one where if you're not doing this today, you should start to look at some of the different mechanisms that are available. And I'm going to share some core examples of what we've done here at RSM internally to help with the artificial intelligence and automation. To give you a little bit of a sneak peek is when we have a proposal that's signed through DocuSign or physically signed, doesn't matter. We take that and we forward it in. And then utilizing the syntax engine, it's going and scraping that information, then starting the appropriate workflows, creating the appropriate, sites and other things we need for project engagement for it. And of course, that's using, some of the artificial intelligence components as well as automation. This is one where we take a look and we say, is Teams too much, right? So when we think about the idea of Microsoft Teams, it encounters so much of the way that we can work, right? It's where most of you live and breathe your life on a regular basis. And so when we think about it, the toggling of the applications, the complaint that I hear on a regular basis is, well, I can't use Teams because we have SharePoint deployed. And when you think about what that really means, it means the users are getting confused on where their data should live. And so there's a mechanism to bring your SharePoint data with metadata, if you choose, in the view, to bring that into the team that the user's working in by adding the cloud storage component. And the permissions are maintained on the SharePoint level then. And so these are things, obviously, from a trend perspective to think about. But as you start to roll out new tools and new technologies and all these things that are great, you might want to take a step back and say, all right, do I need to survey or evaluate my employees and say, what do they actually need, right? What do they actually need along the way? So I'm going to go through these themes a little bit quicker, just in an effort of time here for us as we're taking a look. But because I have demos and I want to do the demos and not the deck for it. But as we take a look, the theme, productivity and collaboration. Why is it important, right? The idea is that users want to use it. We have people that, use paper format already or continue to use paper format. But how do we get started on that? So if you're really focusing on this area, there's obviously some items there and some tips to really help people out. One of the biggest ones I think that's important here is, as you're taking a look, this one for us. The ability to share, using share instead of sending an email attachment or printing off or whatever the case may be. This is one that even today for clients that have had 365 rolled out for over 5 years, I still encounter a lot of technical individuals that don't understand how that works, or they don't understand why it's valuable, right? For it. So just something obviously to take a look at. The other one here is take a look at what you're doing and then focus in on the common use cases. Don't try to solve the most difficult thing that's out there. Here's an example for you. Somebody comes to you and says, we have Microsoft 365. Is there a way that somebody can sign up for an appointment to talk with me? Yeah, there is a couple ways, right? You can go and buy a third-party tool that will do that for you. You could use Calendly and other tools. Or maybe you evaluate bookings and you say, all right, I'm going to make you be a pilot user of bookings, run your use case through that. And if it works for you, then let's document it. And then let's roll it out to the rest of the organization or make that be available. The next theme is the security and compliance, right? When we think about the security and compliance side of it, that is never, ever, ever, ever going to go away. And so when we think about that, it is a lot easier to secure everything if it's in one location versus multiple different locations. And so obviously some specific tips and tricks. This is not a security and compliance presentation, so I'm going to move on past this. But again, when we think about it, security and compliance is a really important item as you take a look at the trust of it. And if you don't think that trust is a thing, talk to a family-held business that has 150 or so employees, and it's in its third generation. And all of a sudden you're saying, take all of your data that is stored in the basement filing cabinets or in that server in the server room that you can go and physically hug, and now move it out there. Right? The challenge is real. The challenge is real when it comes to that. But again, some of the users are pushing it, but there might be some challenges in the back end. The identity and access. And so again, this is not a security and compliance presentation, but when we think about the identity and access, how can we, make that more seamless, or how can we continue to use that? How can I simplify that process? Instead of having maybe two different MFA accounts, one for 365, one for email, can I 365 and one for VPN rather, can I bring those together? Right? And so are there ways to make that happen? Then we have devices, right? So when we think about devices, is there a way we can make that simpler or have that roadmap better? If you're not evaluating autopilot, I would encourage you to really take a look at that. I got a new laptop here a couple months ago. They shipped me a laptop. I logged in, it went and grabbed everything it needed to grab, and I was up and running in a matter of an hour and a half. I put the other laptop in the box and shipped it back, right? And so when we think about it, the devices are really one of those where they expect them to function much like their cell phones do. When you get a new cell phone, you have minimal amount of downtime. Unless, of course, you've broken your cell phone beforehand. And then the last one, as we're taking a look here from the developing culture perspective itself, this is really the one where organizations don't think about it, because for most of you on this call, you may be IT professionals. And when you're an IT professional, you're focused in on break fix, getting it done. You're not really looking at that feedback. Let me tell you, it goes a long way to look for feedback. I recently got brought in earlier this week to a client that had deployed SharePoint Online for document management and project management for an organization of about 75 users. There was a bunch of complaints people had, but no one ever voiced it out. So Pat said, all right, bring me in. Let me talk to them. And with that, in a matter of 30 minutes, I have an entire list written on a piece of paper of all the challenges they had. And you know what most of their challenges were? Training related. No one took the time to say, here's how you did it before, and here's how you're going to do it now. They rolled out SharePoint internally with inside of their organization, and then that's when they said, all right, it's not working. Something went awry. So from an IT side, they were set up success. They had it structured how I would structure it in best practices side. They had the permissions all set up, but they missed those key components on how did the users used to work and how are they expected to work tomorrow. So don't be afraid to open yourself up to feedback and criticism. It's okay to admit we didn't follow it or we didn't ask you questions. So take a chance, ask for feedback. So that is really the main piece is how do I do this loop again? Ask for feedback. What are those challenges out there? Because chances are, if you've had 365 deployed already today, and you've had it deployed for a couple of years, there's a challenge out there that probably has been solved because of a new feature that's out there. All right. When we think about the pillars of modern work, of course, connected, distributed, collaborative, healthy, and honest as well. Yeah, Joe's got a good point in the chat. Without training, and that doesn't mean a classroom, right? There's other ways of doing training. We'll talk about those. You'll never defeat the how we've always done it. So I'll give you a scenario of that specific example. The first challenge that this person named Laura had was she attaches a PDF to emails. Do you know what the solution was? Go into your modern attachments with inside of Outlook, browse to web locations, find the SharePoint site, and click attach. It took a 30-second question and a 45-second answer, and she is on her way and no longer complaining at the water cooler. So again, think about those pieces. You sometimes have to collect that feedback, right? And that's where the honesty comes in too. I'm open and honest when somebody says, and this is another one, this client uses PDFs. And if you're someone that uses PDFs, you know exactly where I'm coming from here. They say, when I go to edit a PDF, I can't edit it from the browser. Yes, there's the add-on that allows you for editing through the document cloud. They didn't have it deployed. And yes, you could sync it and bring it locally to utilize, Acrobat locally on your computer. But that was where I was honest and said, you know what? Great question. There is not an answer that's going to satisfy you at this time. Here is some workarounds for it, right? That's a challenge that's out there. So again, those are some of the different pillars and items to think about here. I'm going to go through this a little bit for us so we don't have to spend time reading and looking at it. Here is a component. Some of you, when you've rolled out 365 from start, you probably have heard this idea of use champions, use ninjas, whatever term you want to use, right? Use people to help with the adoption of the technology. And if you go to the Microsoft adoption site, they will specifically say use champions. Here's the challenge. People use champions and then they forget about them. Don't make it a one-time thing. Do not make it a one-time thing. Don't say, hey, you've done this and now it's time for you to be done. Review with them. So if you're not familiar with the champion side of it, of course, find people that are passionate about what they do, and then people that are excited to help others with the solutions. There's people inside your organization that certainly fit that guidelines here. Why is it important? Again, learning among coworkers is really effective. So to Joe's point, without training doesn't mean classroom training. Use those coworkers, right? I look at trying to think of something I've learned from my coworkers. So in full transparency, I'm not a security and compliance guy. And if I have to unpack and look at conditional access policies to see why something's being blocked, specifically on a device or something of that nature, that's where I've learned from my peers, right? I've learned from people inside my organization to help unpack some of that information. So again, keep that in mind, that it is very helpful if you can get other individuals set up for it. And again, it doesn't mean you need to do classroom-based training. Focus in on number 5 down at the bottom. provide feedback. So when you think about what a champion means, it's the idea of providing feedback. Call it whatever you will, right? There's an organization I'm working with here that's across the entire state of Minnesota. They're based in Minnetonka area, but they have monthly user groups where there's a dedicated topic and then there's an open forum. So every month they're gathering the pulse of the organization, specifically around the Microsoft 365 side. I have another organization I work with that's in Eden Prairie, and they do a very similar piece. They will have a every month they release a video recording of some feature so people can watch it anytime, and then every other month they do a live session for specific topics. But again, they're gathering that feedback from the organizations and from the organization themselves. Right. There's some information on developing a champion program. Again, you can feel free to utilize that if you choose. The one piece to take a look at, though, is how do you make sure it's successful? And it's, active and visible participation. Define the role. Give them some swag of some sort, right? You give them a hat like Wes was switching back between. You give them a cup. You give them a mug. You let them have a special background inside of Teams meetings for them. Heck, you give them praise in Teams, right? And that's going to help drive the adoption of it, and people will want to be part of it. The coalition of peers, make sure that you help scale the adoption efforts and planning. Make sure that they're aware of what's oncoming and what's coming on, right? So there's things that the IT department may not know about. And then, of course, communicate with what the value of the project or of the platform really at that point really says. Let's jump to this champion activities, and here again, the feedback aspect of it, right? When we think about the feedback after the rollouts happen, what type of feedback would need to be captured? Again, oftentimes what we encounter is people will move their email up, their files up, and then they say, we're done. If you're doing that or your organization has done that, that is where the challenge comes in. You really need to make sure you're saying, all right, you know what? We're not done. We have a bunch of these other tools to start to deploy as well. Guess what? If you've rolled out email and you've rolled out SharePoint and you've rolled out Teams, the next thing that's going to blow your mind is task management with Microsoft To Do, because that is slowly taking over task aspect as well. Right. Let's take a look at current usage. So this is, besides gathering feedback from people, how do you identify what are we actually doing? What are we actually using? Where can we look at? What can we do? What challenges do we have today? And so let's take a look. I'll go ahead and bring that in. Joe, thanks. I'm going to bring Joe to all of my presentations. He can do all of my work for me. Like it. All right. I'll provide Kat. Nice to see you again. I'll provide some information on how we're doing that with a client that's a manufacturer for us here in just a moment. All right. So here, when we're taking a look, one of the pieces that I like to highlight, this is a demo environment, so none of the data in here is real. It is used periodically. It is not a production environment, so therefore ignore the specific numbers out there. So when we take a look, if you're not aware, Microsoft obviously provides you a productivity score that needs to be enabled or turned on. They also provide obviously the usage aspect as well for you here to identify what's being used. Now, one of the pieces to make mention about, if I jump into the usage area, Microsoft put in this area here of the usernames. You can turn that off. So you can actually see usernames there as well for it. And they have now added that little box in. was about 6 months ago where they did not have that little gray bar and they just enabled it. And I had to figure out where that setting was. But with that here, as you're taking a look, there's a lot of reports out there of what people are using, right? And you can start to identify those users. What are they using? How are they working with the application? What platform are they using? If you're rolling out, we don't have any Mac users in this case here, but if we had Mac users that were using it and all of a sudden somebody reports a Mac issue, maybe you probably want to talk to some people that are using Macs if you're not a Mac user yourself. So again, this is, the usage aspect of it is really just saying point in time, here's how many people used it. If I switch to the productivity score, this is where the value comes in a little bit. And if you're someone that's on the security side, you probably remember Secure Score, or maybe you're using that to help your roadmap and those types of items. The same thing happens with productivity score. This is going to help you with the idea of, all right, what are we doing today and how can we improve in the future? So if I look at content collaboration, when I click on the content collaboration here, I can see that, again, this is a demo environment, but only 9 people are collaborating with Office online files. So obviously we have some work to do there in this demo environment. But there's some different items on how can we do it? What can we do as well? If I click on view collaboration resources, here is some different playlists from a learning perspective. And I can then send out a specific video if I want to be able to look at and see some of those items. So again, when you're taking a look here, this is really the idea of saying, all right, we have it deployed today. We're missing something. How do we fix it, right? And so that's where that productivity score comes in. Now back to Kat's question about they work with a huge percentage of frontline workers, and that can be hard to increase adoption. These people don't even use email. Typically where I've run across this is on the manufacturing side. I have a DoD contractor that I use that has manufacturers that way. I also have another client that has 400 and some F1 or F3 licenses. I don't remember which one, but anyways, frontline workers. And where they take a look at it from an adoption perspective is they start in small bite chunks, right? So identify what are they actually needing or what are they doing today? So one of the items that has helped for other organizations is obviously the mobile device component. If people don't have a device to access, you're going to have trouble with any adoption, right? If I'm a frontline worker and I don't have a device to access my email on, I'm not going to, right? If there's no incentive for me to do so. So where we've done some other items there in terms of helping out with that adoption of that is, provide some challenges for people. Or the other thing that we've done is transitioned some of their existing communication that may have been printed up and placed on a wall for them, newsletter or those types of pieces of what's going on, actually take that and move that into a team environment or move that into Yammer, for instance, along the way. And so in this case of it, that's really been the helpful item, is to identify, all right, what really matters to them and how can we transition it without impacting their day-to-day work, right? So if we think about it here, what can we do to simplify something that they do today? So one of the items that we did is, instead of having someone physically go around to every single bathroom, because that's where they hung it, was in the bathroom, and it was a weekly newsletter. Instead of having someone spend, it was about 90 minutes of their Monday morning hanging up newsletters, not to mention the 90 minutes on Friday creating the newsletter for the following week. How do we help that out, right? And so it was the idea of saying, all right, let's transition this to pages or news with inside of SharePoint. Let's make it so it's more current and up to date. And let's celebrate some of the different items. So what they did is they made it, be a little bit more fun. They brought in the idea of an employee recognition where it was a form people could fill out. And when they fill out a form, it automatically generates an announcement, right, for them, or creates the SharePoint page. And so from that means that when people were logging in, they were seeing more up-to-date information. Unfortunately, though, if you don't have people with their own device or something of that nature, then you're going to run into trouble. So I would identify what they really like today and start to transition some of that electronically to 365 if you can, right? And so that's a really tough item to look at. The other thing that's helped a little bit here, and I have it in the case next to me for it, and is if you have the luxury of, if depending upon what organization you're in, but if you have the luxury of, utilizing a HoloLens or something, making it fun and exciting for them. So as you're taking a look at the idea of, deployment, or the idea of doing things, gamification, making it some sort of game. Where I've had luck with this, with the HoloLens specifically, and that's why I had it, like I said, I just got back from a manufacturer late last night, is they were testing it out and evaluating, all right, how can I use this to help communicate with someone that's in the shop or somebody that's at home? So what they were able to do is they put it on, jump into the remote assist component. The person on the other end can actually watch and see what they're actually looking at as well. And of course, you can do that with people's phone and that type of stuff. But I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of fun to wear one of these if you haven't worn or done any virtual reality type things before. So again, some of that is I'm not saying go buy a HoloLens for all of your people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying, though, is come up with those specific solutions and then go all in. Say, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it as well. But again, the reason why they wanted to see that was in this whole hybrid work aspect of it, they had a lot of their engineers go remote, and 2 of their engineers actually moved. They moved out of Iowa, and they actually moved to California, right? And what they were having trouble with is when there's a problem on the floor with a part or something, they weren't having a good experience, right? They could bring their phone out there, or they could use their laptop and turn it around and show it, but they couldn't actually pick it up and let people see it, right? And so that's where, evaluating that type of experience helps with the adoption, because then maybe someone becomes more curious. So a little bit of a tangent there, for it. But Kat, hopefully there's some items there. If anyone else has any ideas on how to help Kat with increasing the adoption, feel free to do that and chime in. All right. Let's continue on here for us. Some of the other, items here as you're taking a look. Of course, if you're looking at a specific product or a specific item, that's where you can dive, more or less into the appropriate usage area here. So if I jump into OneDrive, for instance, then I can see obviously the specific OneDrive data along the way, and I can start to identify what's being done there for it. So again, keep in mind that this data is out there. If you don't look at it or you're not reviewing it, I would encourage you to, at least take a peek at it on a regular basis to say, all right, what are we doing and how are we doing that items? All right. There is a Power BI dashboard. I haven't updated this. I don't think the template's updated. Maybe they've taken out the word Skype for Business now and now it's Teams. I'm not sure. But that is available for you as well if you wanted to take a look and see the analytics that way. All right. How should we do this? What are we going to do? How are we going to make that happen? How should we do this along the way? When we think about it, this is a key thing. There is not a plan that works for every organization. That's right. You just gave up 45 minutes of your life for me to say there is not a plan that will work for every organization. There's not the one thing that says, here, you should do this. This is 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Sound like an infomercial guy, right? No, there's not one plan that's going to work, right? And so when you think about that, that's really where it comes in to say, all right, what is the plan for us? And what I like to say is all of your tools should follow some simple adoption phases. And you can customize this. You can merge it or separate it out. I don't really care. This is how I like to approach things when I'm dealing with a new technology that we're rolling out. I like to first of all say, all right, what are the requirements? What is the art of the possible look like? Here's Microsoft's term. for an immersion experience is art of the possible. What are the licensing requirements, right? If I check those 3 boxes, let's move on. Let's look at a proof of concept. If the proof of concept goes well, let's go ahead and let's implement the thing. Let's move on. Let's build it. Let's get it in the tenant. Let's make sure the security and mobile device management and all the things there that we have to check are done. And then let's roll it out. So if you take a tool like Planner, like Bookings, like Viva for that matter, right? If you take a tool like those, if you take a tool, that is Viva, for instance, what are the requirements? Well, I can do Viva connections, with no charge. I can do Viva Learning limited. I can do without having to pay. Otherwise, I have to do this to pay. I can do Viva Insights for personal use. Manager use isn't available unless I pay, right? So what are those items? And then when I take a look at it, how do I do the solution design? Who are my champions at that point? Who's actually going to review this and see how it works? And then, of course, how do I roll it out? Is there training involved? What type of support is involved? Those types of items. So when we think about a communication or immersion experience, art of the possible, those types of pieces, taking a look and identifying what are they actually doing, right? And so when we think about it, identifying that, developing a specific immersion experience or the art of the possible. Here is one thing. If you looked at what those used to be, for those of you that have been around for a while and you've been in the Microsoft 365 area, Microsoft had a push for customer immersion experience, CIEs. And if you Google them, they're still available, right? They're still out there. However, they were designed to say, here is what you can do. And Mr. Executive, please write me a check for this much money, right? It was designed for that idea of saying, here is what you can do with 365. I'm saying there's nothing wrong with that. I'm saying take this time and say, all right, do we need to do this on a quarterly or yearly basis? Do we need to look at what our current challenges are today? There, I'm going to define the term art of the possible. Do we need to define what's possible? And then do we need to do another session as a follow-up after that? Right? And so think about that, right? Instead of saying, here's everything you can do with 365, let's shorten that down and let's say, here's the challenge that we're having today on first line workers. So to the question in the chat, here's the challenge we're having. People aren't using emails. So here's what's possible to help out with that. Right? Bring some of those people in, let them see it, let them experience it, let them hear, maybe from others in the organization. That's why, when Ted and I were talking earlier, that's why I think it's important for a lot of a lot of in-person pieces, because you could have asked those questions maybe a little bit more intimately with others in the room. When we think about it here, again, there's at the very end, the feedback and listening components for us. So again, maybe setting up a team for project collaboration, reviewing the strategy, completing the technical readiness, developing some programs and how you're going to roll it out, and then feedback and listening is there as well. Let's take a step back. How did your Office 365 journey go? And when you think about that aspect of it, it might have gone similar to this. Maybe some of the boxes moved, but I can guarantee one of them that's in the first 1 or 2 areas is this guy right here. Tool here. Email, I guarantee you email was at the beginning, right? For it. Or if it's not at the beginning, it certainly isn't the last thing you're doing for it. So here, when we're taking a look at it, this is normally what organizations do, right? And they just say, all right, we get to the end. And then the biggest question is, what comes next? We've done it all. So let's take a look. This is really the idea of what it should look like. So instead of it being an arrow that just essentially goes and we never review back, it should be a circle. And there could be more items here in this the pie chart area. But where are we at today? So if you have it rolled today, where are you at? What have you reviewed recently? Here's my one tip for you. If you're in charge of it and there's a lot of weight on your shoulders and you have a bunch of other, here's the thing that I've started to appreciate more and more is when I work with clients, I know that they have other things to worry about than if they're using more than, a specific tool within inside of Microsoft. But split this up into a quarter and say, this quarter, I'm going to work on task management. I want to identify how it's being used, and I want to identify a potential solution in the Microsoft side. The next quarter, say, I'm going to focus in on communication, and I'm going to focus in on that area. And maybe that takes me longer because all of a sudden somebody says, well, can we use Teams for phones? Right. And then maybe you're like, you know what, we got to go down that path right now. But take some time and say, where am I going to spend some time for it? The one that gets often forgot is the new features. When you're looking at training and rolling out technology, I'm assuming most of you on this call are curious of what new features are coming. And when you see a new feature, you're like, perfect, let's use it. So if you take a step back in time on some new features, remember when Office 2007 came out and they introduced the ribbon to you and that ugly little button in the upper left-hand corner? And then 2010 came out and then it was the ribbon, but then they brought the file menu back. Then you had 2013 that really didn't change. Then you had 2016 that really didn't change. Maybe a few new formulas in Excel. Then maybe you moved to 365. And what was a recent change in 365? The search box in Outlook moved. Oh no, right? And for most of you, you're probably like, yeah, that was no big deal. It just moved up an inch. Take somebody that has been using Outlook their entire life and it was all always in the same spot, right? Some people might be living on Post-it notes or living in, a world where they're writing things down by hand. So when you think about that aspect of it, how can we translate a little bit more electronically? I will fully admit, I am probably 75% electronic for notes and meetings, and tasks are 100%. But there are some times where it's coming at me so fast that I can't type fast enough, right? So that's why I always have a piece of paper here. And then one of the pieces that I always do is I always type it up afterwards, right? I take the moment and type it up because in this hybrid world, if I'm not at my desk tomorrow, I don't have access to that piece of paper unless I bring it with me. I stole this from the kitchen, by the way. So if you're wondering why it, looks like a kitchen to-do list, it's a pad of paper from the kitchen. All right. So here we are in the art of the possible, showing what's possible, right? So here's, a couple different components. When we take a look, Viva Connections, if you're not familiar with Viva Connections, that is, and I don't know if anyone's on here that is really into Viva Connections, but to simplify it as much as possible, that is bringing SharePoint into Teams. So that is getting our SharePoint intranet site deployed inside of Teams. And you can see that over here on the left-hand side. Here it is there. And of course, this has changed a little bit. It used to be a script you run. Now you don't have to. But anyways, there's the process. And the idea is that now users can access it much easier without having to go into a separate window or separate session. For the next ones here, let's jump into a demo area for us. So when I take a look here, let's jump into the next items out there. So if I take a look, so the next one here that I'm going to jump into is one of my favorite tools that's included in called Viva Insights. And if you're someone that's looking at this and you're saying, all right, how am I working, or what am I working on? Viva Insights has got two different levels to it for it. And we could spend an entire session on Viva as well. I know that a lot of the groups have started to have some sessions or tracks devoted to it. But essentially, there's a free version of Viva that's included with most licensing. Asterisks, I don't recall which ones don't include it. But with that here, what does it do? Well, it does a couple things. One is it allows me to reflect on my day. It allows a user to come in and send praise on a regular basis. It allows a user to come in and book focus time or time to work on their calendar. It allows them to get reminded on any tasks or unread messages that somebody may have for them. So I can click here for the area. And again, this is a demo environment, so it's not as accurate. But in this case of it, this may tell me, hey, you said 3 weeks ago you were going to follow up on an email and you never did. I also have the ability to protect my time. So there's my focus time. You can also let it help you schedule time to read email and catch up and do a virtual commute. Like I said, I live in Lakeville. Our offices are in downtown Minneapolis. I don't miss the traffic, but I miss the time that I was able to disconnect. And so with that, here is a really effective way for you to say, all right, how am I looking at it? Here's where I can go ahead and say, let me go ahead and I can, hit next here. I can enter in some tasks for the next day. How am I feeling? And just like that, now I can close out with some guided meditation to end my day and then walk away, right? I'm keeping track of everything that's in my head. The other item here, the inspiration. You may find this cheesy, and I'll admit there are some cheesy items to this Viva Insights aspect of it, but there are, if I look at this first row of topics, I don't know about you, but if that summarizes my last month, 6 months of work, I'm not sure, they nailed it, right? They nailed it. How do they do the work-life balance? How do we prevent burnout? How do you give yourself permission to dial back? How do you manage through crunch time? You have a go live, you have a hard project coming up. How do you do it? And then rediscovering the joy of work or being at work here. So again, think about it as this is really the idea of starting to bring in some of the different topics and items that are out there. And again, the nice thing about it is you don't have to do anything other than tell someone, right? Tell them that it's available. The other one that's available now is called Viva Learning. Viva Learning is also a paid subscription, but there is a free part of it that's available for you here. Essentially, you can't customize it from a free component. But in this case of it, I can start to browse some of the different LinkedIn Learning courses that are out there. And you'll recognize these. A lot of these are coming from the Microsoft Learn catalog for it. So again, that's where you can start to browse and bring some of those items in there. But again, the idea is let's use the tools that people are comfortable with and let's start to expand, identify a weakness or identify a challenge for it. With it, if you're not familiar, you can deploy apps specifically for, users for it or specific groups of people. If you had those champions, you could have them have a different app available on the left-hand side. And guess what? When people start to see it, they're going to say, what does that do? How do I get part of that team as well? Got to fast forward through a few slides here because we've talked about it. All right, let's talk about some of the art of the possible aspect of it. So like I said, there's a lot of different components out there. So when we think about that AI model, so if you have 365 deployed and you're like, okay, what's next? What can I do now? I'm ready to do it. SharePoint Syntax is probably one of those tools you should evaluate. And so that's where you can actually use no-code models to classify and extract information automatically for you. So here's an example, of it. So again, some items here highlighted out for you. But again, this is where you have the ability to say, all right, grab all this information and then populate appropriate forms and other data components out there. And so that's a really powerful tool or powerful feature out there. Just-in-time reminders. So when you think about those adaptive cards for it, the just-in-time reminders and keeping track of what other items you need to keep track of. Maybe there's some, reminders. I know every morning at 8 a.m. I get a handful of different Power Automate reminders. Either I'm missing project updates or there's a new opportunity that came in, or somebody needs help, right? So that allows me to focus my energy in that specific area as well. When we think about the idea of generating outputs, right? So the idea here is, how can I go ahead and generate an output from there? So actually creating documents and producing them from metadata of specific items there. Document I can't say that this morning. Creating documents on the fly. This is a solution that we have built internally here. We call it the slide builder or slide deck builder, but essentially what it is it is a series of PowerPoint slides. What was that called? There was a feature in SharePoint that's been around for a while called reuse slides. If anyone's ever used reuse slides before, you'll be familiar of this. But the idea here is they can go out, select which slides they want, which decks they want, and Power Automate generates and brings it all together, right? It's a slide builder aspect of it. It's not requiring a user to go and build it. So again, in our case, we have obviously different practice areas and focus areas there. So it's a nice way of having it. And then I just select it and then generates the appropriate bundle for me, and then sends me a link to all of those items. Newsletter digest. This is one I think that's really important as well, is as we're taking a look for it, how do I capture a lot of that information that's out there? There was one topic that was just, and I have it saved in my phone because I have to add it to this. But again, how do you capture your information? Then how do you communicate it out? You don't have to write information. You may be able to just have specific technology news and information that's out there. And maybe once a week you commit to say, here are the 5 different trends or technology news that we're seeing and looking at. And then of course action boards in terms of what you actually need to do along the way. The last one here is we're taking a look is the idea of chatbots. So when we think about the concept of utilizing chatbots, that's the idea of saying, all right, how can we extend our platform altogether? How can we ensure that we're using the tools to their fullest technology? There's a chatbot that's available that I have a client that utilizes ServiceNow as their internal ticketing system. And they rolled out the ServiceNow, I forget what it's called, but it's a chatbot for ServiceNow. And you can actually create service tickets by chatting with the chatbot. So again, you're extending the platform for it. What is that maybe going to do? Well, I hate to tell you, some people don't like talking on the phone to others. So if my option is I can call in or I can chat in, what am I going to do, right? What is my solution going to be? And when you think about it, it might be easier to do that from a ticket perspective as well. Say, here's a bot, you can entertain or ask it questions. You can look up knowledge base articles as well. So let's take a look at the idea of what tools to introduce along the way. So again, when you think about it, the idea of tools and those types of items, if you build it, they will come. I hate to tell you. And then my other favorite one over here on the right-hand side, if you book them, they will come. You may remember that's Wayne's World 2 for it, where he encounters the Indian in the desert. So in this case of it, for it, if you book them, they will come. That is lies, 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 lies. If you engage them, they will come. If you just turn on a tool or turn on a feature, no one's going to use it. Maybe you will because you know it's out there. Maybe someone might stumble upon it. But if you just specifically engage them, then they'll actually come and show up and do items. So again, diving a little bit deeper into what that high level plan looks like here. This is where you can, dive into the specific items. So maybe it is planning the proof of concept of different items. Maybe you are rolling out, data loss prevention or information protection, right? So understanding what the requirements are, proof of concept, buying in. Again, your data loss prevention should not be a one and done like configuration, right? There should be review on a regular basis for it, specifically around retention policies too. Right? Maybe your data is changing. So again, just a little bit more detail around that area. So if we look at specific tools, how would we have done this? So with Microsoft Planner as an example, how would we have done it? So the first part, right, is we could say, you know what, we don't have a consistent task management approach. If you in your organization do not have a dedicated PMO or do not have a dedicated tool like Smartsheets or Rike or Trello or Planner or Project already, I will guarantee you this is a item that you can lead with. Because right now tasks for users are being done in Excel, they're being done in Outlook, they're being done in their heads. Maybe they're using a third-party tool like Smartsheets, but then maybe another department's using another tool. So once you have that identified as an issue of not a consistent task management approach, then take it and say, all right, what are we doing from a department perspective? Identify your key stakeholders. And maybe it's as simple as creating YouTube videos. And Microsoft Planner is not a complex tool at all, right? It is not complex. It is not a, we need to go to a week-long class to learn how it works type of tool. It is a, we need to know it's available type of tool. And then maybe it's weekly check-ins, right? As we're looking forward to it, it's weekly check-ins along the way. Next tool here is we're taking a look is Microsoft Bookings. I got to update that logo. Microsoft Booking. So if I look at it, a specific example we had is financial institutions needed a way to manage who would be inside of their lobby. And I think about this in terms of, you know, everywhere you go these days, certain areas, there's a sign out there that says, you know, please call us before entering in, right? We don't want you in here unless you need to be in here. So this specific financial institution was using a reservations line. So they had a dedicated number that they posted on every door that said, please call us. And then they were told, yeah, you can come in or no, you can't. And so what they did is they implemented a tool called Bookings. And so from a bookings perspective, that allowed for people to schedule or request what time they would be able to come in. They were dedicated an appointment. They were obviously brought in, you know, right away. Appointment scheduling is really important. Think outside of the box. Appointment scheduling doesn't mean you have to physically be in a location. Of course, if you're in the services side or if you know, use any professional services yourself, even personal services like, you know, salons or um, um, you know, reservations for restaurants, any of those, you know, you can see how valuable it is to say, all right, when I show up at this time, I know it's there. So in this case of it, use Bookings to help you. Maybe you schedule office hours yourself and you say, hey, users, go out here, pick a time. This is the time that worked for me. Choose your topic. Choose the time. Maybe there's a handful of people that can work on that specific topic. So you're using the tool, showing how it's used. Again, Microsoft Bookings is a really easy tool to roll out. It might replace a third-party tool someone's paying for already. But again, the idea is use it internally. We have it deployed internally. So if somebody needs a time on my calendar, of course they can look at my calendar. But maybe they, you know, we want to make it so it's available to everyone. So we've started to shift some of those high-level requests of bookings to, instead of it being go out and find this one person, go out here to the bookings, choose which time works, and we'll tell you which person is available. So simplify that a little bit. When we think about the productivity side of it here, you know, what was the first item? We're going to move to Microsoft Teams. We're going to move out of Skype for Business. And in fact, obviously, the Skype for Business and 365 end of life was a year ago now. In the Microsoft Online world, Skype for Business is still alive and well behind the scenes, though they won't tell you that. You still encounter obviously a little bit of that, but you could still have Skype for Business on-prem. So how do I need to look at that? What do I need to do? What are some of the policies that are out there? And then establishing obviously the roadmap in terms of what different tools are out there. Again, there's some other items in terms of specific items of things to think about if you're looking at how do I get Yammer rolled out more? How do I do Teams meetings or the project management needs? All right. I'm going to skip through this just from a time perspective. Now, here's my favorite topic, training. And when we think about training aspect of it, it doesn't have to be, to somebody's point, it doesn't have to be a in-person training session. When was the last time you went to a course and went in person, right? Maybe some of you have the luxury of being able to do that on a yearly basis. You get a week of training, technical wise. Maybe you're someone that learns best by consuming quick snippets of information. I'm going to show you some different items that I've used in the past to help with that adoption. So you may have turned on OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. If you've been to a session of mine before, you have seen this slide. This is not new. This is not rocket science when you take a look at what the tools do. I always like to say, if you have people struggling with what tool do I use, focus in on the beginning, or in Teams world, focus on the entire part of the world. And that's really its intended purpose, right? OneDrive's intended purpose is for one person, or one tool, one other person, right? One person. Teams, team. Smaller group of people. SharePoint, shared. SharePoint is called SharePoint, not LockPoint. So from there, it is shared data. Then at the very bottom, of course, we have our, more or less collaboration. Is it more formal? Who manages it? As well as the group of people. I know for a lot of you, this isn't, brand new information there. But again, maybe it's the idea of saying, all right, I need to come up with an organizational strategy. Maybe users are complaining, all right, we have all these things in OneDrive and nothing's shared. How do I do it a little bit different? Here's another one. If you're having trouble with people adopting the tools, and Kat, this doesn't go to your people that hate technology. I'm going to paraphrase there. This is the idea of someone saying, it doesn't work the way I used to do it. Well, how did you used to do it? And they would say, I created a file and I created it and I saved it on my desktop or in my documents. And when I was ready to share it out, I emailed it as an attachment to a small group of people. And then when I was ready for that and we got all the feedback, then I put it in the network drive for everyone to have access to. Or maybe I moved it from, my iDrive to my team or T drive. And then I moved it to the S or shared drive, right? Guess what? They all exist here today. You're just using modern tools. So identifying what the document process was or what they expect it to be, and drawing a picture of saying, all right, here's how you did it before, and here's how you're going to do it now. And it's okay if you take it directly from one and go to the other, because I can guarantee you have done that before. So I think from that, again, this is focusing on the content side for it, but you could even take a look and take a step back and say, all right, from a communication side, the scenario I always like to jump on right away is when there's an organization that's struggling to adopt Microsoft Teams, the teamwork side of Teams, not chat, because of course that's relatively easy for people to understand why they would use it. Not meetings. We get the idea why online meetings are important now. The teamwork side. I ask one simple question. When was the last time somebody sent an email to a large group of people and a bunch of people replied? I have an example from a client 3 weeks ago. It was their volunteer day coming up for Earth Week this week, last week. And somebody sent out an email asking everyone what their shirt size was so they could order shirts. Of the 353 people that emailed, 100 people, it's roughly a third of the people, emailed directly back to the organizer and said, there's my shirt size. A third of the people hit reply all and proceeded to tell the entire world what shirt size they needed. And then you have the entire, then you have the other ones that just complained and moaned and didn't ever reply to it, right? Because they were too annoyed with it. So that one email that should have been one email or one message then turned into a large amount. So should we have used forms, or should they have used, not we, should they have used forms? Probably, right? But that was they called me in and said, Pat, we're having trouble with people using Microsoft Teams, the teamwork of Teams. And I asked that question. They said, funny you should ask. Yeah, Joe, when we think about the modern document flow of people in terms of how they would just email file attachments, generally that's where I try to highlight the advantage of this little, circle Madhu over here on the right-hand side of working, on files consistently and not having to make changes to it. But again, if it's tens of thousands of employees, that's a hard message to broadcast out to everyone for it. Yeah, you can steal it. I don't care. All right. All right, so from a training side, there's training out there. I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker for a lot of you because, you probably have a browser on. There's training in the admin center for you. You can easily jump in and see that. We saw some of that already. There's cheat sheets available for you from Office 365. If you just Google or Bing Microsoft 365 cheat sheets, you'll find those as well for it. The one that we're going to finish up with here is another tool that I really enjoy, and that tool is called Learning Pathways. Learning Pathways is a tool, if you're not familiar with this, it comes from the SharePoint Lookbook. I heard Elon Musk is going to buy McDonald's and fix the ice cream machines. That's a good one too. All right, I'm interested to see how things change with that. But with that here, as we take a look, there is the idea of learning pathways. If you haven't been out here before, I would encourage you, those of you that may not be SharePoint people, you probably have never heard of the SharePoint Lookbook before, but there is the ability for some specific solutions that are out there for you to see. And I think from here, these are some good templates. Some of these, to be honest with you, are really good. Some of them are like, yeah, I get the idea. But learning pathways in my mind is one that can really help with it, and it allows you to start right away. So with this, there's obviously prereqs that tells you to read it, but essentially it includes, really the idea of an entire site that's devoted to it. And I know there's been past sessions on learning pathways, so I won't go too much, in too much detail here. But essentially this morning, I spun up the site, I clicked the button, it provisioned in a matter of minutes. It's in a SharePoint instance here. If I click on the Microsoft 365 training, I have these playlists that are available for me, and I can, start to see some of the different scenarios that are out there. Just out of curiosity, let me jump into the hybrid work area, and then notice I can see, all right, running effective meetings. I can click on this, and it's going to take me to that playlist on running effective meetings. Where is this coming from? The Microsoft support side, right? I'm not having to maintain or create the content. So again, from a training perspective, you have obviously the instructor-led or traditional classroom instructor-led. You have in-person versus virtual. So that, of course, is a question you need to ask yourself. You have the publicly available YouTube videos. I don't ever like to say, I don't like to have users just have to go find it themselves. I like to spoon feed them. And the reason for it is I can ensure that I'm controlling the message. Right? So if I'm looking at Microsoft Planner and I'm creating that YouTube playlist for people, I'm telling them which ones they should watch. Because you probably have seen things. I mean, have you ever tried to explain Microsoft 365 groups to somebody and how it affects with Teams and how it affects SharePoint and why they're good and bad and how you can see them in Outlook and why you can't see them in other Outlooks? Right? And so when you think about that aspect of it, that's, I think, really a key item. So this does allow for playlists. I won't dive too much into it. Again, if you didn't know this was out there, I would encourage you, to really evaluate this and say, all right, is this something, that we should use as well for it? Just to show you from an administration, you may look at this and say, you know what, Pat, this is great, but I don't need work from home. We're all, we're all professionals, or we have a separate playlist somewhere else. Behind the scenes from an administration perspective, this is where you can choose. Interesting. I just installed it and it's telling me I don't have an updated version. But anyways, this is where you can choose to turn things off or or not on for it. So you can see, you know what, we're not rolling out OneDrive anytime soon, or coming down here to products. There's the dreaded Microsoft Yammer. I just want to turn off Yammer, and guess what? It's now not going to be available, right? It's no longer on my information out there. All right. With that, let's open it up for questions for it. So we're at the end of what I wanted to go through from a topic perspective here along the way. So let's open it up for any questions or comments along the way for you. Went through all those. Oops, there we go.
Pat, I'm going to throw up the survey link as well so that
yes, please do. Yep, you got to take that survey so you can win something. And then Ted's your friend. We had some good information in the chat side of the world too.
I am your friend.
All right. So here in this case, Kat's question, I'll get that answered while people are filling in the survey. For company-wide communication, would you recommend a company-wide team or a company-wide Yammer group, or is this too broad of a question? You know, honestly, when you take a look at that aspect of it, Kat, it really depends upon which tool you think users are going to adopt easier. A company-wide team or an org-wide team, depending upon your size, may work great for that. I would encourage you to restrict who can post to that company-wide channel, controlling that to only administrators only, or making it be some sort of process for it as well. When you look at a community side of it, that of course turns into a little bit more informal, but maybe it is an organizational wide team. The general channel is identified as really those corporate communications, if you will. And then there's a separate channel, you know, maybe there's other channels down below, you know, that are more focused on topics as well. And then you may, you know, there may be a benefits channel that pops in when it's open enrollment, right? So people can ask questions if they choose to, or at least know who to reach out to. It just really depends. If you want to go down the Yammer train, then I would say Yammer is a good spot to go. But if you're if Yammer is not something you want to tackle, an org-wide team with inside of teams can certainly do that. Obviously, there's limitations there on membership. Tyler had a good question. Are Microsoft Learning Pathways customizable? So you can choose which modules are out there. You can also create your own what's called playlists as well. So when you take a look at playlists, that's where you have the ability to add or bring in your own content, whether it's a video, a Word, PowerPoint, PDF document. You can bring that in and augment that yourself as well. There is a lot of information out there on deploying learning pathways for it. But again, some of that is probably just you getting it added to a demo environment. I would encourage you to, you know, you could add it, of course, to a production environment and manage permissions appropriately. But it does require a global admin to get it deployed. Also requires the app catalog to be set up and configured too. Yes, my deck will be available. I'll upload it in the link. I don't know if I've gotten that yet, but I will make sure that it gets available here soon. But yes. All right. Who are we going to pick there, Ted?
All right. I threw it into the random number generator, and the lucky winner is number 2, which happens to be on my screen, Brenda Anderson. Brenda, will you send me your message with your email address so we can get that out to you? Our treasurer will contact you and get you that $25 gift certificate. Congratulations. And everybody, thanks for coming. Pat, fantastic session, as always.
Thank you. Yeah, and you guys have about 5 minutes to go get a refill of coffee or water or whatever your beverage of choice is this morning. And then from there, you got your next group. I don't know who's next in here, Ted.
Next we have Andrea. What is Andrea's last name? I don't know.
Mondello.
Oh, there you go. And it's the Kickstart Your Champions program in 8 weeks with Viva and Power Platform for Teams.
There we go. I introduced a little bit on Viva. So if you're more interested in that,